For more than 2 decades, TNA Wrestling has survived the firing lines of criticism, apathy, and strife. Beginning its life in 2002 as NWA Total Nonstop Action, TNA grew the way an ambitious national power should, but has been met with roadblocks and setbacks that seem customary for them. And yet, despite many prognostications projecting certain doom at different points on their timeline, TNA has persisted to the modern day, celebrating its 20th birthday in 2022 and continuing a consistent run up to the point these words are being recorded. It's hosted established legends while also introducing future stars to the wider audience. It got one over on rival companies, but was also pounded flat in clutch situations. It survived in spite of the odds, but fumbled the ball in would-be winning scenarios. It's innovated for better and worse, and it's made headlines for better and worse. Many bash it, others love it. This video looks back at the life and times of TNA, a pro wrestling underdog story that pays tribute to opportunity, calamity, and likely the most shocking element of all, apparent immortality. This is the complete history of TNA. In 2001, pro wrestling's Big Three became only one. The then WWF purchased select assets from a terminally ill World Championship Wrestling, thus flying their flag to signal the end of the Monday Night Wars. Meanwhile, ECW's debts finally devoured them, as Paul Heyman threw in the towel on the most ambitious independent promotion there ever was. Fans that dined merrily on the entire American wrestling buffet now had to get used to having only one entree at their disposal. And months of overfamiliarity, as well as a subjective decline in flavor, had some desiring a new alternative. But in a wrestling landscape where ambitious indies had once stood on the shoulders of giants, McMahon's empire had seemingly become too tall to reach. The X-Wrestling Federation started up in the autumn of 2001, co-headed by Jimmy Hart and featuring Hulk Hogan in a starring role. XWF felt like a poor man's WCW between the aging stars and unproven youths, and died a death months later. At the same time, Australian concert promoter Andrew McManus started up World Wrestling All-Stars, and held several international tours featuring WWF and WCW cast-offs with reasonable name value. An American pay-per-view in 2002 bombed, however, and it was all downhill for the WWA from there. In the summer of 2001, Jeff Jarrett, who had been exiled by Vince McMahon in the near immediate aftermath of the WCW acquisition, put together a loose concept for a new company with fellow former WCW employee Bob Ryder during a fishing trip. They needed help making their vision a reality, so they reached out to Jeff's father, former wrestler turned successful promoter Jerry Jarrett. Jerry had been out of the wrestling business for several years by this point and was happy running a construction and development company. But the wrestling bug is a hard thing to shake, and soon Jeff managed to get Jerry on board with his plan. And this plan came with a very unusual broadcast model: weekly pay-per-views. On the one hand, by running weekly pay-per-view events at $10 a pop or $40 monthly, thus equaling one WWE pay-per-view but with 5 more hours of content, the Jarretts would avoid the difficulty of trying to land a worthwhile deal on cable television. But with this strategy came a different sort of challenge: building a fan base that would be willing to order the serialized shows on a weekly basis. No wrestling promotion had ever attempted such a daring broadcast arrangement. To try and build a foundation of immediate credibility, the Jarretts forged a relationship with the National Wrestling Alliance. Though Jerry had reservations about the latter-day viability of the NWA name, Jeff believed there was still some value in those familiar letters, and that putting NWA in their branding was smarter than choosing a totally new name from scratch. To complete the name, Jarrett came up with NWA TNA, Total Nonstop Action. The TNA initials were understandably meant to be attention-getting, though originally they were supposed to stand for Tuesday Night All-Stars, as Jarrett originally intended to run on Tuesdays, though WWE pay-per-view replays moved the broadcasts to Wednesdays. With the connection came the use of the NWA World Singles and Tag Team belts, for which the reigning champions, Dan Severn and the Shane Twins respectively, were stripped. Unique to the promotion was the X Division title, a pseudo-cruiserweight belt that did away with weight restrictions and instead called upon daredevil athletes and evolutionary technicians of all sizes to do battle. This would give TNA's weekly shows the sort of car crash action that WWE wasn't always so inclined to present. On Friday, May 10th, 2002, the Jarretts issued a statement announcing the formation of the new company. 40 days later, TNA held their very first event at the Von Braun Civic Center in Huntsville, Alabama, a pay-per-view double taping, a live event plus matches for the following week's show. Soundtracked by longtime WCW analyst Mike Tenay, polarizing scribe Ed Ferrara, and boisterous home shopping pitchman Don West, the first NWA TNA pay-per-view was a mixed bag of promising developments and groan-worthy happenings, but it was nonetheless an alternative. The big match on night one was a two-part contest to determine a new world champion, a 20-man gauntlet for the Gold Rumble in which the final two entrants would then face off under conventional singles rules to determine the titleist. Jarrett led off the parade of WCW washouts and assorted indie novelties before getting done in by Scott Hall and headline-grabbing country singer Toby Keith, whom Jarrett insulted earlier in the night as part of a publicity stunt. The winner ended up being credible ex-WWE star Ken Shamrock, who polished off Malice, formerly The Wall in WCW, to capture the title. With Shamrock, Hall, and Jarrett as the familiars at the top of the card, TNA had to rely on a few lesser-knowns to make up the bulk of the roster. The X Division was anchored by veteran Jerry Lynn, unique martial artist Low Key, and phenomenal youngster AJ Styles. The streamlined Malice had potential as a lead monster, while Puerto Rican star Apollo and ex-linebacker Monty Brown looked the part of credible heavyweights. And former WWF wrestler K Quick began reinventing himself with an angry attitude as Ron the Truth Killings. On the other side of the tracks were a few questionable characters. There was Cheeks, the rotund mauler with a fraction of Rikishi's charisma and mobility. There were the Flying Elvises, three talented athletes that donned white jumpsuits and struck the cliched kung fu poses of the King. The tag scene included the Johnsons, who were the Shane twins being forced to wear penile-toned bodysuits, the Rainbow Express, Lenny Lane and Alan Funk as a less ambiguous West Hollywood Blondes act, and the Dops, a family of incestuous rednecks that included young Trevor Murdoch. Then there was Puppet the Psycho Dwarf, who infamously pounded his flounder inside a trash can. But good, bad, or firmly middling, none of that mattered as the summer wore on, because TNA had a major problem. The Jarretts were severely overspending on the events after a pay-per-view consultant named Jay Hassman purposely misled them into believing they'd surpassed the break-even threshold of pay-per-view buys, when in fact, they came nowhere near. TNA fired Hassman and filed suit against him, but then another problem came up. The promotion's primary financial backer, Health South, pulled out in August amid their own burgeoning scandal as a result of accounting irregularities. TNA was barely holding on as the summer came to an end, and it looked like the promotion was going to die a quick death. That is, until Jeff Jarrett reached out to an old friend. For the company's marketing, TNA had hired a firm called Trifecta Entertainment, which was founded by Dixie Carter, whom Jeff had known for some time. When TNA found itself in dire straits, Jarrett reached out to Carter, who then reached out to parents Robert and Janice, founders of the Dallas-based Panda Energy. The Carters bought 71% interest in TNA for $250,000, saving the company. Dixie would later be installed as TNA's vice president. With TNA living to fight another day, the roster continued its motivated metamorphosis. Former DX members X-Pac and Road Dogg debuted for TNA that autumn, as did recent Plane Ride from Hell participant Curt Hennig. TNA's first major breakout tag team was America's Most Wanted, consisting of outgoing cowboy James Storm and the more stoic Wildcat Chris Harris. The two won the NWA World Tag Team titles in September, and then entered into a multi-month feud with Father James Mitchell's Disciples of the New Church. Most of the raves went toward the X Division, which Lynn, Styles, and Low Ki presided at the top of since Styles became the first champion in June. Ki and Lynn went on to hold the title later that summer following three-way bouts, before Lynn and Styles engaged in a straight-up singles feud for the title over the autumn months. Further additions were made to shore up the X Division title picture, including now former Elvis impersonator Sonny Siaki, ECW alum Kid Cash, and diminutive indie standout The Amazing Red. In the NWA World title picture, Shamrock was merely an elaborate vessel, holding the belt for about 7 weeks before losing it to Killings, whose caustic heel shtick was proving to be a weekly highlight. After going over proven names like Hall and Hennig later in 2002, The Truth lost the belt to Jarrett in November, following an assist from a hooded individual called Mr. Wrestling 3. Jarrett watched on dumbfounded as the masked man turned out to be Vince Russo, who'd been writing for TNA since the summer months. Russo then became the leader of an irreverent group of heels called Sports Entertainment Extreme, or SEX, because sex sells. Off-screen, Russo was just as enterprising. At a meeting of top staffers, Russo allegedly caused a rift by openly blaming Jerry Jarrett and his purported outdated ideas for nearly leading to TNA's premature demise. Apparently annoyed that son Jeff never spoke in his defense at that meeting, Jerry removed himself from TNA's day-to-day operations, also in part due to the stresses that TNA's other problems had caused him over the prior months. Come 2003, TNA continued fleshing out a more consistent and talented roster. D'Lo Brown left WWE to begin a renewed push in TNA. The X Division and tag title pictures were occupied by Triple X, a sex splinter group consisting of Low Ki, Christopher Daniels, and primetime Elix Skipper. Other established talents stopped in for spells of differing lengths, like Dusty Rhodes, who became a spiritual leader of sorts for TNA in their fight against Russo's army, and Roddy Piper, whose bizarre rant directed at Russo was very, very regrettable. The biggest pickup was Raven, a mere 2 days after getting released by WWE. Reborn with a push befitting the Bowery dweller of eras gone by, Raven immediately entered the main event picture after attacking Jarrett and stealing the NWA World title. Raven wasn't the only ECW alum that entered TNA in this period. The Sandman, New Jack, Justin Credible, Perry Saturn, Mike Awesome, and Shane Douglas all arrived over the months ahead, turning Nashville's TNA Asylum into a southern version of the ECW arena. Most of them even entered to Dale Oliver-produced knockoffs of their ECW themes. Raven's arrival gradually built to a big April 30th pay-per-view in which the ECW icon would challenge for Jarrett's World Championship. Given the heavy hype, many assumed that a title change was inevitable. However, the chaotic battle concluded with the promotion's co-founder defying the odds and overcoming Raven's many obstacles in order to retain the NWA title in the aftermath. Disgusted fans threw trash into the ring, while the reaction from others expressed similar irritation. Fans just weren't buying Jarrett as a conquering hero, no matter how he performed. 6 weeks later, the belt did change hands in a match involving Jarrett and Raven, but it was the match's third participant that came away with the spoils. With yet another assist from ever-meddling Vince Russo, 26-year-old AJ Styles won the NWA title, giving him the TNA Triple Crown and effectively turning him heel in the process. Jarrett remained a babyface, while Raven veered toward de facto heroism. But no matter the alignments, TNA's roster, along with a few visiting performers, were about to produce 3 solid months of programming that indicated a bright future for the still young promotion. TNA's 1-year anniversary featured the debut of Sting, who teamed with Jarrett to take on Styles and Sean Waltman. America's Most Wanted regained the tag titles from Triple X members Christopher Daniels and Elix Skipper in a dramatic steel cage match. Sinister executive Don Callis introduced the Ultimate X match, a high-wire alternative to ladder matches, christened by an imperfect but exciting battle between youngsters Chris Sabin, Michael Shane, and Frankie Kazarian for the X Division title. Sabin also won an 8-man Super X Cup tournament, outlasting Teddy Hart and Juventud Guerrera in excellent bouts. The roster also continued reshaping itself. Indie talents CM Punk, Julio De Niro, and Alexis Lurie, aka Mickey James, formed The Gathering, a collection of underlings for the paternalistic Raven. Conan, Ron Killings, and BG James formed 3 Live Crew, a collection of irreverent babyfaces that mixed insider comments with stoner comedy to great effect. And The Masked Abyss gave TNA a monster heel with much promise. Though there was no women's division, professional stuntwoman Trinity and the bespectacled Tracy Brooks played major parts in the company's championship scenes. With momentum on their side, TNA took the liberty of putting together a compilation pay-per-view to air during an off week that September, and offering it to consumers for just 1 cent. To promote the card, TNA bought ads during the WWE Raw episode that aired 2 nights earlier, and had staffer Jeremy Borash ask the audience via voiceover if they were bored with the wrestling they were watching at the moment. Raw in 2003 was heavy on Triple H's interminable reign, as well as WCW rejects and other booking unsavories, so TNA was striking at an ideal time. Picking up with fresh programming in the autumn, TNA welcomed more incoming wrestlers such as ECMO, the future Umaga, Vampiro, and, in his first major exposure in the business, college-aged Eric Young. The former Crash Holly had turned up as Mad Mikey late in the summer, but tragically passed away in November at the age of 32. Meanwhile, Jarrett regained the NWA World title from Styles as a means of setting up a major bout intended to headline TNA's first ever 3-hour Sunday pay-per-view. That October, Jarrett attacked Hulk Hogan at a press conference following a New Japan card, smashing his trademark guitar over the Hulkster's head. Hogan was coming off a resurgent nostalgia run with WWE, in which the now 50-year-old Hulk was treated with reverence as an elder statesman of sorts. He and Jarrett had theoretical unfinished business from their controversial Bash at the Beach altercation in 2000, and it made sense to revisit that angle for TNA's next big promotional leap, especially as Hogan could still be a worthwhile headliner under the right circumstances. The big pay-per-view was to be called Bound for Glory, and was tentatively scheduled for Sunday night, November 30th. After replaying Jarrett's attack on their broadcasts several times, however, TNA never released concrete details on the pay-per-view, and the event was quietly dropped. Hogan backed out, citing reported knee and hip issues, but it turns out that he was just using TNA as a bargaining chip to try and leverage a new deal with WWE. In the meantime, TNA all but removed Russo from the grind to accommodate Hogan, due to the ugliness and legal fallout of the 2000 Bash controversy. Flipping the calendar to 2004, TNA leaned back on its reliable X division to flesh out a new monthly concept, the America's X Cup. There, countries would be represented by 4 wrestlers who would face off across singles and tag matches in one night for bragging rights and superiority. Team Mexico, led by Juventud Guerrera and Hector Garza, dominated over the months ahead, before Team USA, consisting of Jerry Lynn, Chris Sabin, Christopher Daniels, and Elix Skipper, won a 4-way World X Cup in May to end the concept. In troubling news, in March of 2004, TNA ended its talent-sharing agreement with standout indie group Ring of Honor, after Ring of Honor founder Rob Feinstein was caught in an internet sting operation. After video of the scandal circulated through major news outlets, Feinstein resigned from Ring of Honor, but TNA chose full disassociation from the company. This necessitated pulling Styles and Daniels in the midst of major pushes. In Styles' case, his Ring of Honor Pure Championship was vacated. CM Punk chose to remain loyal to Ring of Honor, however, quitting TNA following the scandal. That May, TNA signed a deal to premiere on cable television, though it was a peculiar arrangement. Through Fox Sports Net, TNA Impact would broadcast for 1 hour on Friday afternoons, while markets without a Fox Sports affiliate would air TNA on different channels in irregular time slots. Filmed at Orlando's Universal Studios, soon to be dubbed the Impact Zone, Impact was, for a time, a component to the weekly pay-per-views, and reminded some of WCW's TV tapings at the same complex in front of a similar freebie crowd. For Impact, TNA debuted the polarizing six-sided ring. That hexagonal stage will make its way to Nashville for the weekly pay-per-views just in time for the second anniversary card. A year after Sting first appeared, TNA made another major debut happen in the form of Jeff Hardy, a year after leaving WWE. The charismatic enigma provided a major bump in both star power and relative youth at a time when TNA was getting ready to retry the 3-hour pay-per-view concept. Though, to do that, the weekly model was gonna have to end. TNA bade farewell to the Asylum on Wednesday, September 8th, more than 100 broadcasts after attempting the risky weekly pay-per-view model. Throughout the course of 2004, Jarrett was reinforced as the company's lead villain, dropping the NWA World title to Styles, who lost it to Killings, who lost it back to Jarrett in the first ever King of the Mountain match, a TNA staple that sometimes left fans a little confused. And Jarrett firmly established that he was king when he retained his title over Hardy on the Nashville finale. The first 3-hour TNA pay-per-view, Victory Road, was held Sunday night, November 7th in Orlando. Once more, Jarrett took on Hardy in the main event, this time in Hardy's signature ladder match. The veteran title holder won once more, after interference from a returning Scott Hall and debuting Kevin Nash. This NWO 2000 reunion under the banner of the Kings of Wrestling was met by another debuting icon, Macho Man Randy Savage, who appeared in the closing seconds of Victory Road. However, Savage was quickly gone from TNA, walking out following an incident backstage with a visiting Hulk Hogan. Savage was coaxed back to take part in a planned feud with Jarrett, at a time when TNA was doing all it could to shore up the star power of its roster. Diamond Dallas Page emerged in TNA just after Victory Road, while a returning Sean Waltman and debuting Billy Gunn, initially called The Outlaw, turned up in early 2005. Through their Fox Sportsnet connection, TNA aired a TV special in conjunction with the Best Damn Sports Show period to promote Victory Road in the event's run-up. TNA also made a few headlines for some interesting footage they'd shot late in 2004. WWE was on the studio lot filming the commercial for the forthcoming Royal Rumble, so TNA sent a veritable welcome wagon consisting of 3 live crew, Abyss, Tracy Brooks, and Shane Douglas to greet them. Several WWE talents appeared with blurred faces in the ill-gotten footage, including an unmasked Rey Mysterio, while TNA had a little fun mocking WWE in their response to the intrusion. As Mike Tenay quipped, "It's not like we drove a tank up to Titan Tower." Meanwhile, Jarrett's reign on top dominated the first couple of months of 2005. After Savage backed out of the January Final Resolution pay-per-view and subsequently retired, Jarrett defeated the increasingly popular alpha male Monty Brown to retain his title, a move questioned by many. Jarrett went on to defeat Nash and DDP in subsequent pay-per-view outings, the latter of which saw Brown turn heel and assist Jarrett in victory. Away from the regularly criticized main event picture, the X Division and tag team scenes were often stealing the show. There was America's Most Wanted's victory over Triple X that December in a steel cage match where the losers would have to split up, but not before Elix Skipper defied gravity with his cage top Hurricanrana. Then there was Styles and Daniels' 30-minute Iron Man match for the X Division belt at February's Against All Odds. Styles went on to defeat Abyss in an ultra-violent David vs. Goliath battle at the first ever Lockdown pay-per-view in April, before conquering world champion Jarrett that May, ending the reign of terror 2 weeks shy of 1 full year. Unfortunately, Styles' victory couldn't have come at a worse time. Less than 2 weeks after he defeated Jarrett to win his 3rd world title, TNA and Fox Sportsnet ended their agreement, leaving TNA without any sort of TV outlet. For the months ahead, TNA continued to tape Impact, but had to resort to uploading the episodes online as BitTorrent downloads. The final weeks of the FSN series featured posthumous appearances for a resurging Chris Candido, who died in late April from pneumonia after flying home following lower leg surgery at the age of 33. As TNA sought a new TV home, they held the first ever Slammiversary on June 19th, commemorating 3 years of existence. On a night where Raven became NWA World Champion 2 years after his first challenge of the belt, TNA debuted a heavyweight with plenty of upside. Samoa Joe was fresh off a 21-month reign as Ring of Honor World Champion, and hit the ground running as an imposing force of nature in the Impact Zone. At Slammiversary, Joe all but squashed Sonjay Dutt en route to a dominant summer, which included him beating Styles to win the Super X Cup. Joe and Styles were also part of the match that many consider to be the greatest in TNA's history, and was the first TNA match to receive a 5-star rating from Dave Meltzer. X-Division champion Daniels defended against both men in a triple threat at September's Unbreakable pay-per-view, and was pinned by Styles after the division pioneer countered an Angel's Wings into a pinning combination. Joe remained technically unbeaten, but all 3 men were winners when it came to delivering perfect in-ring fare. Meanwhile, Jarrett found his way back to the top of the mountain once more, pinning Raven to win the title at a Border City wrestling card in Ontario in mid-September. This time, it was strongly booked babyface duo America's Most Wanted that aided Jarrett's golden cause, turning heel while helping him regain the title. Over a year earlier, Jarrett regained the title just as TNA was making the move to cable TV. Here, the Chosen One reclaimed the belt just as TNA was returning to the national airwaves. Beginning Saturday, October 1st, TNA broadcast on Spike TV, which had recently been vacated by WWE after their move back to the USA Network. The arrival on Spike TV gave TNA a more consistent TV foothold, one that wasn't going to be hampered or preempted for live sports. To celebrate the television upgrade, TNA introduced a few new faces to its fold, like Team 3D, the renamed Dudley Boys. Brother Ray and Brother Devon joined fellow ECW alums Rhino and Sabu in a year where extreme nostalgia had never been stronger. TNA also acquired WWE Exodee Gail Kim, initially making her a valet in Jarrett's camp. These moves came on the cusp of Bound for Glory, TNA's answer to WrestleMania. Jarrett was originally intended to defend his title on the card against Nash, but Nash pulled out due to a medical issue. To create buzz in lieu of Nash's absence, TNA had Rhino, who'd already won a thrilling Monsters Ball match over Sabu, Abyss, and Jeff Hardy, go over on Jarrett to win the belt. Rhino only reigned with the belt for a few days before losing it back to Jarrett at an Impact taping. Rhino, Team 3D, and Gail Kim occupied prime space on TNA broadcasts, while the next person to leave WWE was about to become one of the faces of the company. Multi-time champion Christian decided to leave at the expiration of his contract in early November of 2005. Surfacing in TNA at that month's Genesis pay-per-view, Christian added the Cage surname he'd used earlier in his career to become TNA's new top babyface, and was immediately booked as such. In early 2006, Sting returned to the organization, this time signing for the long haul. Sting's previous TNA stop-ins were entanglements with Jarrett, and it made sense for him to go after Double J once more, feuding with the Greater Planet Jarrett faction that included America's Most Wanted and later a debuting Scott Steiner. Now in his late 40s, Sting was arguably performing far better between the ropes than he had in his run as Crow Sting in WCW, and this Sting looked to be far more motivated. Fans were motivated too. His return appearance at Final Resolution did over 40,000 buys, TNA's most successful pay-per-view to date. Christian's challenge of champion Jarrett at February 2006's Against All Odds fell a little short of that high mark, but still performed well enough to be the second or third most successful TNA pay-per-view so far, depending on whose numbers you believe. Undefeated in his first 3 months with TNA, Christian kept the streak going after upending Jarrett to capture his first world title mere weeks after kayfabe brother Edge won his first world championship. The fans rushing the ring to celebrate with Christian felt like a big big moment for an ascending star. Meanwhile, Samoa Joe continued his dominance of the X Division. In late 2005, Joe's relatively perfect record remained intact after he defeated Styles to capture the Niche Division's championship. In early 2006, it was more of the same as he pummeled Daniels into oblivion in January and survived a triple threat with his two nemesis the following month. At March's Destination X, however, the Ultimate X concept hamstrung the heavier Joe, allowing Daniels to defeat he and Styles to capture the title by pulling the belt down from the suspension cables. In April of 2006, TNA Impact moved to a more desirable Thursday night time slot. On the first broadcast for the new night, Joe regained the X Division title from Daniels, while Sting defeated Team Canada's Eric Young in the main event. Debuting on the show was Brother Runt, the former Spike Dudley, as he reunited with his table-breaking brethren. And while TNA was upgrading their TV product, they were also experimenting with house shows, as race car driver Hermie Sadler started his own promotion, the United Wrestling Federation, co-promoting with TNA in various cities. TNA displayed several tropes of a growing promotion, just as they also dabbled in tropes of the more cliched variety. In the spring, they gained Jim Cornette, not only for the creative side of TNA, but also as an on-air authority figure, another troubleshooter in an endless line of troubleshooters. TNA had also brought in former WWE official Earl Hebner as senior referee, and had him carry out an overt screwjob ending at Slammiversary, putting the belt back on Jarrett in the process. But few would argue that TNA's next big pickup wasn't contemporary. At the conclusion of September's No Surrender pay-per-view, an elaborate promo video heralded the impending arrival of Kurt Angle, 1 month after he received an unconditional release from WWE. Over the previous 7 years, Angle established himself as one of the most versatile and talented wrestlers on the planet, and TNA scored a major coup in signing him. However, Angle left WWE under a dark cloud of personal issues, and few people outside the bubble understood just how bad things were for the gold medalist. Immediately, Angle was put into a feud with the nearly invincible Samoa Joe, and fans salivated at the prospect of just how great their encounters were going to be. The 2006 pay-per-view set a new high mark for company buys, as around 60,000 fans witnessed the first salvo of Angle and Joe's rivalry. In the end, Joe ceded his first true loss in TNA, submitting to Angle's ankle lock. The two faced off twice more over the months ahead, with some criticizing the rushed nature of what could have been a long-term feud. Perhaps not coincidentally, around the time Angle vs. Joe commenced, Vince Russo turned back up in TNA after 2 years away. This was especially challenging for recent hire Jim Cornette, who has sometimes hinted at a personal distaste toward Russo. The booking committee juggled Angle vs. Joe with several other major developments at a time when TNA had considerable momentum on their side. This period included TNA's first ever 3-hour pay-per-view to take place outside of the confines of Orlando's Impact Zone. The 2006 Bound for Glory was held at the CompuWare Sports Arena in suburban Detroit before a crowd of 3,600. On the card, Angle officiated a world title match in which Sting defeated Jarrett to capture the NWA title more than 16 years after he first won the belt from Ric Flair. Elsewhere on the night, the likes of Joe, Christian, Chris Sabin, the Latin American Exchange, Eric Young, Bobby Roode, and Austin Aries, then known as Austin Starr, picked up victories, indicating bright futures for the relative youth of TNA. Post-Bound for Glory, the TV situation further improved when Impact moved from late night to prime time starting that November. It was on that broadcast that Angle wrestled his first TNA match, defeating Abyss. TNA brought out other big guns on that night, including having Daniels win the X Division title over Styles and Sabin in a triple threat, as well as a barbed wire steel cage match in which Christian defeated Rhino. With its most impressive roster to date, TNA was understandably bullish about putting on the most spectacular show possible. TNA continued to stumble back and forth on the line between creative originality and contrarian stupidity. The woeful fight for the right reverse battle royal became a laughingstock in fan and critic circles. The New Age Outlaws had reunited, first as the James Gang, but later became the Voodoo Kin Mafia, or VKM, Vince McMahon's initials. They issued empty threats to WWE in the vein of DX to WCW years ago, but this time, the gap between companies only made TNA look amateurish. TNA also lost Monty Brown to WWE in this period, marking the waste of a truly special homegrown that fans liked. There was also an electrified steel cage match between LAX and Team 3D at April's Lockdown, before an admirable 6,000 fans at the Family Arena in suburban St. Louis. The farcical match, complete with inconsistent electrocutions, somewhat undercut a pretty good pay-per-view, one with an attendance figure worth celebrating. But that was the duality of TNA, good talents sometimes having to make do with bad ideas. Come the spring of 2007, TNA would need to come up with ideas for their new championships. Effective almost immediately, TNA and the NWA's working agreement had ended, which meant that TNA forfeited the singles and tag world titles back to the Alliance. They then created brand new TNA World and World Tag Team belts and awarded the latter to Team 3D by virtue of their recent holding of the NWA belts. As for the singles title, that belt was immediately held up after the three-way match that May to fill the vacancy, due to a convoluted double fall. Thus, the true crowning of the TNA World title would come at a most appropriate location and event. On June 17th, TNA commemorated 5 years of existence with Slammiversary, to be held in company hometown Nashville at the Municipal Auditorium. While the 5-year milestone would indicate a big night for TNA, only 3,500 fans showed up to a venue capable of hosting a crowd of 9,000 to 10,000. Notably, every TNA pay-per-view in 2007 to this point did equal or lower buy rates to the same name events from 2006, and Slammiversary was no different, drawing no more than 25,000 buys compared to the 2006 event that did between 30 and 35,000. In the main event, TNA did crown an official champion through their polarizing King of the Mountain match. The match was originally supposed to include hometown star and company founder Jeff Jarrett, but unfortunately, Jarrett's wife Jill passed away from cancer shortly before the pay-per-view. Jarrett was replaced by Wildcat Chris Harris in a 5-man field that also included Styles, Christian, Joe, and eventual winner Angle. TNA's 5th anniversary event concluded with the crowning of almost inarguably the company's top star, setting the stage for a rather controversial second half of 2007. The news most synonymous with that period was the acquisition of suspended NFL cornerback Adam "Pac-Man" Jones. Jones was due to miss the entire 2007 season due to his co-facilitation in a Las Vegas altercation that resulted in one of his associates firing a gun into a crowd, wounding 3 and paralyzing 1. With Pac-Man in the headlines, TNA vexed audiences and critics by bringing him in, and further irritated them by making Jones a tag team champion, despite not being permitted to engage in any sort of physical in-ring activity. But even the Pac-Man controversy couldn't prevent TNA from taking another necessary step forward, gaining a 2-hour time slot for Impact. This expansion began with the broadcast on October 4th, 2007, the penultimate episode before the annual Bound for Glory pay-per-view. The 8-man main event was won by Joe, LAX, and Junior Fatu, the former Rikishi, who was only with TNA for a cup of coffee. Though Big Quiche was there long enough to famously forget Robert Roode's name in a pre-taped promo, Fatu's tenure followed the equally brief tenure of Andrew Martin, the former Test that had been let go from WWE earlier in the year. In the main event, Kurt Angle, following a hot summer in which he simultaneously held each of TNA's belts for about a month, lost the TNA title to Sting, despite hitting one of the most unconventional 450 splashes you'll ever see. It also marked the 3rd straight year that the new champion coming out of Bound for Glory lost the belt within 30 days. In Sting's case, he dropped it back to Angle 2 days later. The younger generation shone at Bound for Glory. Samoa Joe handed Christian his first true in-ring loss 23 months after the Instant Classic arrived in TNA. Jay Lethal, who got over with his spot-on Randy Savage impression, retained the X Division title over Christopher Daniels. Even the goofy Reverse Battle Royal featured a number of promising upstarts, like comically paranoid Eric Young, arrogant day trader Bobby Roode, now solo drunk James Storm, and the cat-like Motor City Machine Guns, Alex Shelley and Chris Sabin. The biggest story coming out of Bound for Glory was the introduction of a new championship. The women of TNA finally had a belt of their own through the introduction of the Knockouts Championship. A 10-woman gauntlet was held to crown the first title holder, with ex-WWE faces Gail Kim, Christy Hemme, and Jacqueline matching up with breakouts like Angelina Love, Talia Madison, and the imposing Awesome Kong. Gail became the first champion after defeating former VKM sidekick Roxy Laveau, giving the division a firm anchor to start. Over the months ahead, Gail and Kong warred over the championship, delivering the best women's in-ring fare on the US national stage. Kong captured the championship in January, becoming the ideal final boss heel of the title scene. Meanwhile, the rest of the women's roster began fleshing out their own characters, none more prominent than the Beautiful People. The aforementioned Love and Madison, renamed Velvet Sky, brought overt sensuality to a division that was well rooted in athletics and physical combat. For many TNA fans, the Knockouts division was a highlight, and the weekly Nielsen's indicated specific fervent interest in their exploits. On the veteran front, TNA picked up recent WWE ex-Adis Booker T and Sharmell, months after Booker was last seen putting over a returning Triple H at SummerSlam. Booker's debut took place at November's Genesis pay-per-view, teaming with Sting to take on Angle and Nash. Sharmell provided equalizer to the interference of Kurt's wife Karen, though the heels ultimately prevailed. While Booker's debut went off well enough, an aborted return the following month shone a light on just how perilous TNA's reliance on aging names could be. Closing out 2007 with the Turning Point pay-per-view, TNA booked Joe to team with the Outsiders, Nash and a returning Hall, to face Angle, Styles, and Tomko. However, Hall no-showed the event, and Joe, with the apparent blessing of TNA management, tried to blunt Hall's absence by cutting a promo that praised the company's ascending youth. In doing so, Joe spoke for longer than expected, dared an off-camera Dixie Carter to fire him, and ended up having a heated backstage quarrel with Nash over the remarks made toward Hall. TNA even managed to instigate a controversy with a WWE performer just days before WrestleMania 24. WWE's big event was taking place in Orlando, so during a live Impact days before in the same city, TNA put the cameras on undercard wrestler Robbie McAllister of the Highlanders, who was trying to watch inconspicuously from the recesses of the crowd. After being caught on camera, McAllister was called by a WWE official who ordered him to leave the venue immediately. He did, but that was only the start of an issue. Though McAllister later revealed that he was unhappy in WWE and subconsciously trying to get himself fired, the TNA on-camera appearance cost him his 4-figure WrestleMania bonus, and he and partner Rory were removed from television. They returned months later for brief job duty before getting released. As for TNA, who initiated the conflict by choosing to show a WWE performer at their event, they bragged on their website about getting one over on WWE, reportedly resulting in a number of TNA talents getting heated enough over the outing that TNA decided to take the posts down. 2 weeks after that fiasco, TNA got something extremely right. A shade under 3 years after debuting for the company, Samoa Joe finally won TNA's world title, defeating Angle in the main event of the 4th annual Lockdown in Lowell, Massachusetts. A crowd of 5,500 packed into the Tsongas Center to watch Joe wager his career against Angle's belt in a match with heavy MMA influence. Despite the caged combat flavor, a standard pinfall was the finish, as Joe won with his patented muscle buster. At long last, Samoa Joe was the man in TNA, and would appear in numerous supercard main events to come. Joe's first pay-per-view main event was a triple threat match in which he was almost inarguably upstaged, though mostly in hindsight. 10 nights before May's Sacrifice pay-per-view, opponent Scott Steiner delivered his now celebrated Steiner Math promo, in which Big Papa Pump rambled and stumbled through various oddsmakers' percentages before applying spurious addition to demonstrate why he had the best chances of winning. The numbers didn't lie, and neither did the bewildered expression on the face of Steiner's protege, P.T. Williams. That summer, an unlikely challenger unseated Awesome Kong to become TNA Knockouts champion. Former WWE developmental prospect Chantel Taylor, renamed Taylor Wilde. Wilde debuted as a planted fan that answered Kong's open challenge, and shocked everybody by managing to defeat the looming title holder. While a milestone moment for Wilde, her title reign came to illustrate the reportedly low pay for TNA's Knockouts. It was later revealed that Wilde had to supplement her income as champion by working at a shopping mall sunglasses stand, and when a fan recognized her as a TV wrestler, she quit the job out of embarrassment. During the summer months, TNA continued holding its pay-per-views outside Orlando's Impact Zone. Slammiversary took place in South Haven, Mississippi, close to the Tennessee border near Memphis. July's Victory Road emanated from main eventer Booker T's hometown of Houston. Hard Justice in August ventured to Trenton, New Jersey, while September's No Surrender went north of the border, taking place in the Toronto suburb of Oshawa. The attendances peaked at 3,500 fans, with a paltry 2,000 turning up for the group's 6th anniversary card. TNA went back to the well of acquiring a famous face, but this one was mostly beloved by fans. Mick Foley had recently departed WWE after a contentious stint as SmackDown color commentator, due to frequently butting heads with a shouty Vince McMahon. Foley was soon introduced in storyline as co-owner of TNA, allowing him to make regular TV appearances with the looming promise of occasional matches for the deathmatch legend. Unfortunately, Foley's TNA arrival came too late for inclusion in the company's first and thus far only non-portable video game release. Released in September 2008 for Xbox 360, PlayStations 2 and 3, and the Wii, TNA Impact was produced by the ill-fated Midway. Considered a mostly decent game, TNA Impact boasted a deep enough roster and was the first wrestling game to offer wrestler expansions via DLC. The game also introduced a new character, a mysterious masked figure called Suicide in the story mode. Suicide later migrated to TNA's Real World and was played by various wrestlers including Frankie Kazarian and Christopher Daniels. The following month, TNA held the 4th annual Bound for Glory in what has become the American city most often rewarded with premier wrestling content, Chicago, Illinois. 10 years later, the Sears Center Arena would host the ever-important All In, but the venue's big-time pro wrestling christening came on October 12, 2008, with 5,500 fans witnessing Abyss fly through a flaming table, Jarrett defeating Angle, and Samoa Joe's dethroning at the hands of Sting. Unlike with the prior 3 Bound for Glories, this time the champion was going to reign for a more respectable period of time. That's because Sting turned de facto heel, joining up with Nash, Angle, and Booker, and later Steiner, to complete the main event Mafia, a group of aging stars that explicitly banded together to keep the hungry young lions from usurping their spots. Sting's character expressed reservations about membership, but concluded that since he was lumped in with the other greedy mainstays, he had to align with them to ensure his own survival in a company with a pronounced youth uprising. And that uprising took on the handle of The Front Line, feuding with Sting and company in different forms going forward. Shortly after forming the group, the Mafia introduced a new secondary title to the company, the Legends Championship. Originally an unsanctioned vanity title, Booker T was declared the first champion, though the belt gained official status in March 2009 at Destination X when Booker lost the title to Styles, thus giving Styles claim as the first ever TNA Grand Slam champion. As for the world title, one might think Samoa Joe would avenge his loss to Sting, but he was busy leading a one-man nation of violence and attacking Steiner with a machete. The man that ultimately dethroned Sting was not a young rising star, but rather a man that Sting had wrestled on pay-per-view in the early 90s, Foley. Before 4,500 fans at Philadelphia's Liacouras Center, the former Cactus Jack defeated Sting at Lockdown to win the 4th world title of his career. On the same night, Bobby Lashley made his debut for TNA more than a year and a half after he was last seen in WWE, in the midst of the biggest push in his career to date. After a respectable Slammiversary in which Angle regained the world title, on July 19th, TNA produced Victory Road. The event quickly gained infamy as one of the worst pay-per-views of all time, most notably for a match between Sharmell and former Survivor contestant Jenna Maraska. Video of Maraska's inept performance became instant botchamania fodder, while the rest of Victory Road was a woeful watch. The main event Mafia escaped with all the men's belts as the push continued toward Bound for Glory. Behind the scenes, there was considerable turmoil. Backstage staffers Savio Vega and Dutch Mantell were released in late July, while September saw BG James and Jim Cornette both let go. All of these individuals had considerable ties with Jarrett, and an apparent power struggle was in progress. Cornette's exit from the company came after a total falling out with noted mortal enemy Vince Russo. It later came out that Cornette, in an email to TNA staffer Terry Taylor, said that he would kill Russo if he could, for which Cornette received a stern letter from TNA's legal department. October's Bound for Glory drew only 2,400 fans to Irvine, California for what turned out to be a very good pay-per-view. Sting's event winning streak came to an end when he was unable to dethrone Styles, who'd been champion since September, for the title. Strong matches involving Angle, Lashley, Joe, Foley, Abyss, and the always reliable X Division performers demonstrated that even in tumultuous times, TNA had enough talent to deliver inside the ring. And as the noughties came to a close, TNA had designs on getting stronger. The company established Knockouts tag titles a decade before WWE thought to do the same. They hired former Ring of Honor World Champion Nigel McGuinness after WWE passed on him following a failed physical. And TNA closed out 2009 with 2 more strong pay-per-views in Turning Point and Final Resolution. Meanwhile, all eyes were on the next decade, specifically the date of Monday, January 4th, 2010. In late October, it was announced that TNA had signed 2 important names: Hulk Hogan and Eric Bischoff, the latter of whom was named as an executive producer. The 2 power brokers that once presided over WCW's most successful period were going to debut at the top of TNA at the advent of the new decade. To introduce the pair, TNA would stage a special 3-hour Monday night broadcast of Impact to go head-to-head with the WWE Raw episode that would feature the return of Bret Hart. And the TNA broadcast was a newsworthy one, to be sure. In addition to Hogan and Bischoff appearing, there was the debut of Ric Flair and returns from all 3 Wolfpack members, as well as the return of Jeff Hardy, who had left WWE months earlier before finding himself in serious legal trouble following a drug-related police raid. In addition to all of these undoubted Hall of Famers, there were also debuts for the Nasty Boys, Sean Val Venus Morley, and Orlando Jordan. Brian Kendrick came along to TNA shortly after, as did Mr. Ken Anderson. Also, the standard 4-sided ring returned, much to the relief of everyone's spines. Also debuting around this time was radio personality and longtime Hogan loyalist Bubba the Love Sponge. Weeks after first appearing as a backstage interviewer, Bubba shortly became public enemy number 1 by making incendiary comments about Haiti and the fallout of their devastating earthquake. This prompted Awesome Kong to physically attack Bubba backstage. Neither was long for the company after the incident, as Kong asked for her release after citing a number of issues, and Bubba was fired at the end of April. On the heels of the January 4th Impact, responsible for the most watched hour in Impact's 6-year history, TNA decided to move Impact to Mondays full-time, beginning March 8th. Though Raw won the head-to-head on January 4th by about 2 full ratings points, Impact did its best number to date, while Raw didn't see much change from its usual score. The idea was to rekindle the classic WWF-WCW wars of a decade plus earlier, and see if TNA could close the gap on the biggest game in town. To say that they couldn't would be an understatement. The March 8th broadcast was slaughtered by Raw, doing only 2/3 of their record January 4th number, and was pretty well pasted by Raw's rating. The episode in question gained infamy for the bizarre debut of popular star Rob Van Dam, who immediately beat Sting, but was then summarily beaten down by his conquered opponent after the match, treated like a hapless loser. The March 15th episode did Impact's lowest rating in close to 3.5 years. During the course of this pitiful war, TNA attempted to make a heel-turned AJ Styles into the new Nature Boy, with Flair as his mentor, while Abyss was repackaged as an easily impressed simpleton that idolized Hulk Hogan. And Samoa Joe was kidnapped by ninjas. The series of booking missteps resulted in the Monday numbers ticking downward. In the April 26th head-to-head, Raw won by nearly 6.5 ratings points. Weeks later, TNA waved the white flag and retreated back to their Thursday night home. Following the inability to mine WCW nostalgia in the positive sense for themselves, TNA turned to ECW nostalgia. That August, the Hard Justice pay-per-view was rebranded as Hardcore Justice and would serve as TNA's attempt at a one-night stand. The recently debuted Tommy Dreamer faced Raven at the event, while Van Dam, who defeated Styles for the TNA belt months earlier, faced Sabu in a non-title match. The quality was considerably down from the 2005 reunion show, and TNA had to work hard to avoid trademark infringements, which they were sometimes unable to do. Van Dam's reign as champion ended shortly after the pay-per-view, but not inside the ring. Reportedly due to his number of contractual dates being on the verge of lapsing, TNA wrote him off television following what looked like a fatal attack by Abyss and the spike-laden board he called Janus. TNA then set up a tournament to crown a new champion at Bound for Glory. Angle and Jeff Hardy fought to a 30-minute draw to both qualify for the finals, while Mr. Anderson beat fellow WWE alum The Pope, aka Elijah Burke, to be the other contender. At Bound for Glory, Hardy became the new TNA World Champion, after turning heel and aligning with Hogan and Bischoff at the end of the match. This was the formation of Immortal, a group that Abyss, also a member, had prophesied for weeks with signs informing us that they were coming. Jarrett soon joined the group, while they formed a strategic alliance with Fortune, a horseman-like faction that included Flair, Styles, Kazarian, Wolf, and the beer money duo of Rude and Storm. The storyline continued with the revelation that Bischoff and Hogan had tricked Carter into signing over ownership of TNA to them, giving the dastardly heels near insurmountable control of the company. Around this time, a real-life shake-up took place backstage, as Terry Taylor was let go from his talent relations role and replaced by Bruce Pritchard, nearly 2 years after Brother Love departed WWE following a 21-year tenure. Shortly before Bound for Glory, Mickie James made her return to TNA, following a successful and high-profile run in WWE. Also in was Matt Hardy, rejoining Jeff after obtaining his own release from WWE. As the calendar flipped to 2011, a few industrial icons were at a bit of a crossroads. After being with TNA on and off since late 2004, Nash left that January to rejoin WWE, where he reappeared as a surprise in the Royal Rumble match, as did fellow Mafia alum Booker T. Sting, meanwhile, ultimately spurned an offer to jump ship and face The Undertaker at WrestleMania 27, instead resurfacing in TNA to defeat Hardy for the world title in late February. The Sting-Hardy match did a strong TV rating and necessitated a rematch at March's Victory Road pay-per-view. Infamously, Hardy showed up for the main event match in no condition to perform, and was forcibly pinned by Sting at the end of a 90-second farce, which was facilitated by Bischoff giving both men the new finish after both had already entered the ring. Sting vs. Hardy was the capper to an atrocious pay-per-view that included nonsensical finishes and fans completely turning on a Van Dam vs. Anderson match after multiple botches and a double count-out ending. Jeff Hardy, who was still on the legal hook for his 2009 arrest, went away for a while as TNA tried to right the ship. In early May, the Impact TV series underwent a subtle name change to become Impact Wrestling and adopted the slogan, "Where Wrestling Matters." The show dropped its mostly red color scheme in favor of a blue, white, and grey combination. Shortly after, China made an unexpected debut in TNA, aligning with Kurt Angle to face Kurt's ex-wife Karen and her new husband Jeff Jarrett. The following month, TNA celebrated 9 years of existence with their latest Slammiversary in Orlando. There, Anderson won the TNA title from Sting, while Bully Ray, the former Brother Ray now estranged from Devon, defeated Styles in a chaotic last man standing match. The evening closed with a pair of old familiars, as Angle defeated founder Jarrett in a match to become #1 contender for the world title. However, the next pay-per-view was going to focus more on a specific division. July's Destination X was all about celebrating 9+ years of the X Division. Numerous stars of eras past were welcomed back for a night of feel-good moments and scintillating action. Van Dam turned back the clock to defeat Jerry Lynn in a callback to their ECW rivalry. Styles defeated Daniels in a 28-minute main event. And Brian Kendrick won the X Division belt from unlikely champion Abyss, foiling Bischoff's kayfabe plan to destroy the X Division once and for all. But the most talked about match was a 4-way featuring a quartet of outsiders, where the winner would receive a TNA contract. Company alum Austin Aries won the fast-paced 13-minute clash over Low Key, Jack Evans, and Zema Ion, aka Whacking Wild. But while Aries signed with TNA, Destination X marked the legitimate exit of Generation Me, Max and Jeremy Buck. Better known as the Young Bucks, Matt and Nick Jackson would later detail great dysfunction in TNA's backstage culture and were now free to forge an identity as one of the best and most talked about tag teams of their era. Future New Japan cornerstone Kazuchika Okada also fled from TNA after being greatly misused as a sidekick. Speaking of eras, Ric Flair's era had clearly come and gone. Though still a capable performer with full knowledge of every trick of the trade, the Nature Boy was past 60 and looking every bit of it during his occasional TNA matches. After being given a grand send-off at WrestleMania 24 3 years earlier, Flair broke his in-ring retirement at the end of 2009 for a Hogan-led tour of Australia, and went on to wrestle 12 matches for TNA over the 2 years that followed. Flair was sidelined in the spring of 2011 after the 62-year-old suffered a torn rotator cuff, but he reportedly elected not to undergo surgery. He wouldn't wrestle again until September, where he'd battle Sting, the man he had his final WCW match against a decade earlier on an episode of Impact. The match went 15 minutes live, but several minutes were edited off for quality reasons, as Flair tore his triceps on an ill-advised superplex and was clearly struggling for breath at different junctures. Flair never wrestled for TNA again. This decision was fully endorsed by Spike TV officials, who had often sent TNA memos requesting that Flair remain clothed and not bleed at his advanced age. In regards to TNA's future, a strong push commenced for erstwhile tag wrestler Robert Roode. In the summer months, TNA staged a G1-style round-robin tournament called the Bound for Glory Series, a 12-man competition to determine a #1 contender for the world title. Roode made it to the end of the field, outlasting Bully Ray, Jackson, Gunner, Riker, and partner James Storm to win the competition. Unfortunately, however, Roode fell short against champion Angle at Bound for Glory in Philadelphia, mystifying many fans. That was merely the prelude to the next step of the angle. Storm challenged a now wounded Angle to a title match on Impact and stunningly won the title in a matter of seconds. Roode expressed joy for his partner, but there was an evident underlying bitterness. In fact, when Roode made a friendly challenge to his partner, he found himself in danger of falling short once more. Consumed by greed, Roode, after a moment of overt contemplation, took advantage of a late-match ref bump to strike Storm with his own beer bottle and steal the title, instantly becoming the biggest heel in TNA in one fell swoop. While Roode reigned supreme, TNA made a few changes behind the scenes. One was appointing a new head writer, as Bruce Pritchard officially took over the position. Russo remained with the company, still writing the weekly television, but the ascension of Pritchard was done to help simplify the TV product and apply more focus. In addition, TNA put together an agreement with Ohio Valley Wrestling to become their developmental arm. OVW had long been WWE's farm system until the sides parted ways in early 2008. Meanwhile, a TNA program actually managed to draw 14 million viewers. But it wasn't for an American card. In early 2012, TNA started up a brand exclusive to India called Ring Ka King. Jarrett ran the operation, aided by the likes of Sanjay Dutt, Jeremy Borash, and writer David Lagana. The roster consisted of TNA regulars like Scott Steiner, Magnus, and Abyss, as well as some native wrestlers, most notably Mahabali Shera. The premiere episode in January drew 14 million viewers, and crowds were wildly enthusiastic. For unclear reasons, however, TNA dropped the project in April after just one season. It was also outside the United States that Hulk Hogan had his final ever match. Hogan's last American match took place at October's Bound for Glory in Philadelphia, losing to Sting, or rather, Joker Sting. A bizarre twist on the character that had Steve Borden channeling both Cesar Romero and Heath Ledger to unlikely acclaim. This Sting cackled and hooted as he held Bischoff at bay with a menacing bird and dipped into untapped comic whimsy as he tortured Hulk. After the Bound for Glory match, Hogan turned babyface in a feel-good moment. On January 27th, in front of 4,300 fans at the MEN Arena in Manchester, England, Hogan teamed with Sting and Storm to defeat Rude, Angle, and Bully Ray. And though nobody knew it at the time, it was the final match of Hulk Hogan's storied career. As Hogan perhaps unwittingly wound down his wrestling days, Russo was out of TNA altogether. In February, as part of a restructuring that saw David Lagana assume a heavier creative workload, Russo quit the company shortly before the Against All Odds pay-per-view. With Pritchard and Bischoff determining much of the creative direction, Russo found himself with less power and less say-so, and chose to leave the company yet again. One new creative direction for TNA was the institution of a reality show-style competition called the Gut Check. Once a month, an outside wrestler would have an audition match on Impact against a contracted performer, and 3 judges, originally Pritchard, Flair, and Al Snow, would evaluate them afterwards. If the wrestler got 2 yes votes, they would be awarded a developmental contract, but 2 no votes meant the wrestler went home empty-handed. Successful entries included Sam Shaw, the future Dexter Lumis, Taylor Hendricks, Wes Briscoe, son of Gerald, and former ECW talent Christian York. Also getting the nod was second-generation wrestler Alex Silva, though he originally wasn't supposed to get picked. During the judgment portion of the competition, Flair legitimately went off script after Silva improvised an impassioned promo and voted yes on him instead of the intended no. Though that spur-of-the-moment decision made the Gut Check more interesting, Flair wasn't long for the concept and was replaced by broadcaster Taz. In fact, Flair was done with TNA altogether. In May of 2012, TNA filed suit against WWE and a man who had worked for both companies, named Brian Wittenstein. Wittenstein had departed TNA the previous summer and allegedly signed a severance agreement that required him to not share confidential proprietary information. The suit alleged that Wittenstein had downloaded TNA business information, such as the expiration dates of contracts, and provided them to WWE, with whom he'd been working since earlier in 2012. A WWE official reached out to TNA to inform them of Wittenstein's actions and added that they fired him as soon as he disclosed the information. TNA, however, alleged that WWE waited several weeks before firing Wittenstein and had used the insider info to try and poach TNA talents. The suit specifically named Flair, as Flair had reportedly sought his release in order to return to WWE sometime after Wittenstein's alleged disclosure. Flair had already appeared for WWE that year when he received a second induction into the Hall of Fame along with other Four Horsemen alumni. To get Flair for the appearance, WWE sent reigning Intercontinental Champion Christian to TNA for a one-night return at June's Slammiversary, where he announced Sting as the charter inductee into TNA's Hall of Fame. Flair was formally let go from TNA amid the contract tampering mess. Meanwhile, TNA made the decision to go live with Impact every week, beginning May 31st. It was in this period that TNA produced a few more of their patented infamies, like the Claire Lynch storyline, in which Daniels and Kazarian claimed that Styles had impregnated an apparently crazy woman, but it was all revealed to be a half-baked ruse. The Knockouts division didn't have it much better when Hulk's daughter Brooke was made the women's authority figure, despite having limited experience on wrestling programming. Meanwhile, Hogan had his own issues. That spring, a video of a past sexual encounter featuring he and Heather Clem, the now estranged wife of Bubba the Love Sponge, was released online. Hogan had been filmed without his consent, and at the end of the video, Bubba can be heard telling Heather, "If we ever need to retire, here's our ticket." That autumn, Hogan sued the Clems for invasion of privacy, with a settlement coming weeks later. Weeks before the settlement, Gorka posted a snippet of the video, prompting legal action that would turn out to have far greater implications. Meanwhile, Hogan also had problems on screen in TNA. A new stable suddenly emerged, although the identities of its members weren't immediately evident. They were called Aces and Eights and were portrayed as marauding bikers that wore face coverings. The group attacked Hogan, Sting, and other babyfaces over the months ahead, while the identities of the main members remained a mystery. The first significant member reveal was that of Devon at the 2012 Bound for Glory. Gradually, members like Wes Briscoe, Garrett Bischoff, Doc Gallows, Mr. Anderson, and D'Lo Brown showed their faces as Aces and Eights became a focal point of TNA to polarizing reactions. Taz turned heel to become the group's spokesman, giving Aces and Eights a voice at the commentary desk. But the grandest moment for the group occurred at the March 2013 lockdown, in front of a domestic record 7,200 fans in San Antonio. There, Bully Ray, who had recently married Brooke Hogan in a TV angle, was revealed as the group's leader during a main event in which he won the TNA World title from Jeff Hardy. Several champions prior to Bully, Robert Roode set a new high mark for the TNA World title, holding it for a new record 256 days. Styles was the only other man in the belt's 5-year lineage to have reached the 200-day milestone, so Roode's reign was a departure from the TNA norm. Across his 8.5 months as champion, Roode beat Styles, Sting, and former partner Storm in high-profile outings, before getting done in by one of TNA's genuine sensations of the day. Austin Aries nearly reached 300 days as X Division champion after winning the title in September 2011. Through strong in-ring performances, Aries amassed an equally strong fan following, and the belt was genuinely used to elevate AEW. Aries became the first man to voluntarily hand in the X Division title in exchange for a world title match, and defeated Roode in a classic at the 2012 Destination X, winning the title to an enormous crowd response. Unfortunately, the reign proved relatively short, as he lost the title to a bigger name in Jeff Hardy at October's Bound for Glory. Hardy retained the championship over Aries and Roode over the next 3 pay-per-views, including in a triple threat match at the Genesis pay-per-view on January 13th. This event in particular was significant because after an 8-year run, TNA was dropping its monthly pay-per-view model in favor of a streamlined calendar. Tentpole's Slammiversary and Bound for Glory remained, while Lockdown stayed in the rotation through 2014. TNA pay-per-views peaked at 60,000 or so buys in late 2006 and had drastically dropped off since then. To offset the loss of the monthly shows, TNA began filming special themed pay-per-views under the banner One Night Only to run in the off months, cutting costs while offering die-hard fans some non-canonical fare propped up by a gimmick. Many of the events welcomed back alumni for one-offs while featuring unsigned indie wrestlers. The One Night Only series in 2013 included Extravaganza, an X Division themed show, Joker's Wild, a lethal lottery concept, and other events, many of which were filmed months before they were actually broadcast. What wasn't a cost-cutting move was taking Impact on the road more frequently. Bischoff believed that Orlando's Impact Zone was a drain on TNA's credibility, and that Impact needed to emanate from new locations to appeal to the home viewer. Over the months ahead, Chicago, Tampa, Atlanta, Vegas, Louisville, and cities in Arkansas, Pennsylvania, and Mississippi hosted Impact tapings as part of the campaign to give TNA a little more profile nationally and appeal better to the home viewer. The move turned out to be a disaster. Costs drastically went up, while TV viewership did not. TNA had spent a hefty chunk of change to improve their prestige, and it hadn't worked at all. By November, they'd reverted back to their Orlando base, setting up shop once more. But along the way, they paid a heavy toll for their spending decisions. Beginning in 2013, TNA entered cost-cutting mode, and it led to one of the most alarming roster changeovers any promotion has ever gone through. Around mid-July, TNA parted ways with more than 10 individuals. Perhaps the most consequential name on the list was Bruce Pritchard, holder of important talent relations and creative positions within the company. He had been blamed for almost allowing reigning tag team champion Robert Roode's contract to lapse earlier in the year, though Pritchard later claimed that Roode's new deal was withheld by other officials in an attempt to lowball the longtime TNA star. Others were outright released or just didn't have their contracts renewed. Gallows, Tara, the former Victoria, Madison Rayne, Crimson, and Matt Morgan all departed the company, while Devon left in August after an 8-year run. Mickie James stuck around for a bit without a contract before ultimately leaving in the early autumn. Reports indicated that James was offered only $60,000 a year to stay. Also gone was Jesse Sorensen, who suffered a catastrophic neck injury at a 2012 pay-per-view. Sorensen claimed that Dixie told him she would never fire him while he was injured, and then reneged on it after he'd been moved to the production staff while recovering. Sorensen also accused Carter of not paying his medical bills after promising to do so. Hogan's contract expired in early October. His final angle was to refuse an offer from Dixie to join her in joint domination of the company and walk out of the arena. And no Hogan, of course, meant no Bischoff. Eazy-E hadn't been an on-screen character in well over a year, bowing out after being pinned by his son in a multi-man Lethal Lockdown match, but he continued to work backstage up until around the time Hogan departed, after which he was sent home from TNA to sit out the remainder of his contract. Bischoff and his son, along with business partner Jason Hervey, later sued TNA for unpaid salary. The next significant loss was of the company's most dependable star. AJ Styles had been Mr. TNA for well over a decade, winning every belt multiple times over and saving many a supercard with his off-the-charts performances. When the company ailed, Styles did his best to come through for them. In the autumn months, stories of Styles' expiring contract surfaced, and the Phenomenal One claims it was only then that TNA made any effort to try and re-sign him. In the end, Styles refused to ink a new deal. Stories came out that he was offered a pay cut of 50 to 60%, and he later claimed that 60% would have been generous. Despite the impasse, Styles captured his final TNA World title against Bully Ray at Bound for Glory, only to be stripped of the belt 9 days later. In early December, Magnus, known better as Nick Aldis, won the vacant championship in a convoluted tournament final. Styles did return one last time to put Magnus over before officially departing for New Japan, ending an 11.5-year run with the company. Days after Styles formally rejected TNA's final offer, the company lost its co-founder. Jeff Jarrett hadn't wrestled for TNA since 2011, but had been given a backstage role. As 2013 wore down, Jarrett and country singer Toby Keith, who appeared in an angle with Jarrett at TNA's first pay-per-view, tried to buy TNA from the Carter family. Reportedly, after Bob Carter insisted that his daughter remain in a prominent role, the deal fell through, leading to Jarrett and Keith creating their own golden opportunity by founding Global Force Wrestling instead. Another major loss was that of Sting. Following 8 years of capably anchoring main events and major angles in spite of advancing age. Sting's final acts in the company were losing to promising heel Ethan Carter III, the kayfabe nephew of Evil Dixie, and then dropping a title versus career match to Magnus in January. Before the end of the year, Sting would finally make his debut for WWE. After these wholesale changes altered the landscape of TNA's upper crust, the company sought to rebuild. Former Ring of Honor titleists Davey Richards and Eddie Edwards signed with the company, as did former WWE and New Japan star MVP. Bobby Lashley returned to the company after a 4-year absence, accepting EC3's open challenge. Younger wrestlers began fleshing out personalities, whether it was Rockstar Spud as a lovable sidekick or Samuel Shaw as a possibly homicidal stalker. In the main event scene, TNA rewarded Eric Young, an employee of the last 10 years, with a world title reign as he defeated Magnus for the title in April. Once TNA's resident comic relief, Young received a valiant underdog push not unlike what Daniel Bryan had in WWE at the time. He went on to retain his title over Magnus at Sacrifice at the end of April before defeating Lashley and Aries in a three-way cage match at Slammiversary in June. However, days later at Impact, Lashley defeated Young to win the championship. In this period, MVP began managing Lashley, marking their first on-screen union. Following a fan vote, TNA brought back the six-sided ring during the summer of 2014. Though many TNA loyalists had been partial to the unique ring, a number of vocal wrestlers like Aries and EC3 favored the classic square design, noting that the hexagon version was more taxing on the body, whether in taking bumps or running the much tauter ropes. But nonetheless, a fondly recalled part of classic-era TNA was being brought back, at a time when TNA was trying to reamass all that lost goodwill. Just as TNA looked to be stabilizing after a tumultuous year plus, things really hit the fan at the end of July. Spike announced that they would not be renewing their contract with Impact when it lapsed at the end of the year, ending a 9-year run on the channel. At the time, reports indicated that Vince Russo, who had left TNA more than 2 years earlier, was still serving as consultant for Dixie, and that was somehow the reason for Spike cancelling. However, the two aren't believed to be related. Despite being Spike's highest-rated program, the costs of Impact were apparently too expensive to offset the low revenue generated through ads. After the news broke, Dixie announced that TNA and Spike were still negotiating, but all TNA managed to gain was a few extra months on air running into December. In the meantime, TNA had lost more reliable stars. Daniels announced back in April that he was out after more than a decade, while Bad Influence partner Kazarian finished up weeks later. Team 3D, including a returned Devon, finished up in October after the two were inducted into TNA's Hall of Fame. But the pair did come back long enough to face the Hardys and the Wolves in a pair of acclaimed ladder matches for the Tag Team Championships. They were also on hand to put Dixie Carter through a table on an August episode of Impact, which TNA incessantly hyped up by using #ItHappens. But from there, the future of TNA looked bleak. After Bound for Glory on October 12th, which took place in Japan as a joint effort with Wrestle One, TNA had no more tapings scheduled for the rest of 2014. In TNA's final weeks on Spike, a lifeline was announced. Beginning in January, Impact would debut on Destination America, a cable channel with considerably lower reach than Spike. On Wednesday, January 7th, Impact premiered on its new home, running live from New York's Manhattan Center in front of just 500 fans. In the main event of the first broadcast, Lashley regained the TNA World title that he'd lost in the autumn, defeating Robert Roode. The premiere episode only managed 263,000 viewers, a sharp drop from the shade under 1 million they accrued for the final Spike broadcast. Impact then moved to a permanent Friday night time slot beginning the following week, and continued dispensing fare from several days' worth of New York tapings. Following a long tour of the UK at the end of January, TNA brought the operation back to Orlando. However, the TV tapings had the challenge of trying to maintain audience interest for longer stretches due to the fact that TNA downgraded to just 2 pay-per-views a year, Slammiversary in the summer and Bound for Glory in October. Just 3 years earlier, they were still running 12 live monthly events a year. The exits only continued for the old guard. Samoa Joe's contract negotiations fell apart during the UK tour, and he chose to finish up with the company. Months later, he was appearing in NXT, where he debuted by confronting Kevin Owens. On the broadcasting side, Mike Tenay was replaced on the Destination America program by Josh Matthews. The Professor quietly receded into smaller roles before departing the company at an indeterminate point in late 2015 or early 2016. And in 2016, Tenay confirmed that he was retired from the wrestling business altogether. One unusual acquisition in 2015 was that of Smashing Pumpkins lead singer Billy Corgan. Corgan had long been a wrestling fan and made several appearances in late-stage ECW before turning down a chance to invest in the dying company. He then founded his own Chicago-based indie called Resistance Pro in the early 2010s before getting on board with TNA on the creative end. Also debuting for TNA in this period were Drew McIntyre, now Drew Galloway, and two stablemates in Micah, the future Tonga Loa, and Eli Drake, the future LA Knight. Just months after moving to a new network, however, TNA already hit an excruciating snag. On May 21st, it was revealed that Destination America was already cancelling the Impact TV series effective later in 2015. The word was that while Destination America was pleased with the viewership numbers, they weren't good enough to justify the cost of airing the programs. For TNA's part, they denied that the cancellation stories were true and even threatened legal action against those reporting it. Not only were the stories true, but a week later, Destination America signed a 26-week deal to broadcast Ring of Honor, putting it on Wednesday nights and moving Impact back to Wednesdays to have Ring of Honor as its lead-in. One day after news of the cancellation was made public, a screenshot of a recent Dixie Carter email in which she insulted Destination America executives, calling them dummies, made headlines. The problem was that Dixie accidentally CC'd the president of the company into her emails. It's likely that the gaffe had nothing to do with the decision to cancel, but it probably didn't help. The fiasco only continued when TNA produced its annual Slammiversary pay-per-view on June 28th, which was the first live TNA pay-per-view of 2015 due to cutting down the calendar to just this and Bound for Glory. The event followed 4 days of TV tapings at the Impact Zone, so future episodes post-Slammiversary were already taped. This meant that for those who read the spoilers, a number of matches on the pay-per-view had their outcomes telegraphed. Taryn Terrell appeared as Knockouts champion despite having lost the title 3 days earlier to Brooke Tessmacher. World champion Kurt Angle didn't even wrestle at Slammiversary, having lost the belt at the same tapings to EC3, who worked a tag match at Slammiversary. The match between James Storm and Magnus was centered around an absurd storyline where Storm killed Magnus's fiancée, Mickie James, by pushing her in front of a train. However, before the match, Magnus delivered a promo that disregarded this implausible plot. Instead, he focused on TNA's 13-year history and praised Storm as a Day One original of the promotion. The reason for this was the imminent wave of exits about to hit TNA. Around the time of the pay-per-view, both Storm and Magnus announced their departure, with Magnus revealing his move to Jarrett's Global Force Wrestling. Aries, Low Key, Gunner, and Sam Shaw were also leaving, along with recent Knockouts champion Terrell. By July, MVP and the recently returned Bully Ray had also left the company. An invasion angle between Global Force Wrestling and TNA was briefly staged and then scrapped when Jarrett and TNA producer John Garberick disagreed over its direction. News outlets reported that TNA morale had sunk to an all-time low, while Backstage staffers had gone months without being paid. In September, 4 months after the news of Destination America cancelling TNA Impact came to light, Dixie Carter claimed in a Sports Illustrated article that they were still in negotiations with the network for 2016. On October 4th, TNA held the 11th annual Bound for Glory, theoretically the company's biggest show of the year. It drew approximately 1,800 fans, many of them papered, to the Cabarrus Arena in the Charlotte, North Carolina suburb of Concord. For the Carolina faithful, the night ended with a feel-good moment, as Matt Hardy captured arguably the biggest singles title of his career, defeating EC3 and Galloway in a 3-way match to become TNA World Champion. The following month, almost a year after landing the Destination America deal, TNA found another network willing to broadcast them, Pop. Formerly the TV Guide channel, Pop was reportedly available in many more homes than Destination America, but still wasn't much of a TV juggernaut. The move to Pop would situate Impact on Tuesday nights, meaning that in the show's 11-plus year history, they would have broadcast regularly on 6 different nights, Sunday being the lone exception. Despite getting a new lease on life with a new home, TNA still watched star power slip away. They missed out on a chance to bring AJ Styles back after a 2-year absence, after he and the Good Brothers reportedly reneged on a move to TNA in order to sign deals with WWE. Meanwhile, Kurt Angle departed after a 9.5-year run, wrestling his final matches for TNA at the end of January before spending the remainder of the year taking select indie bookings. While Storm did come back, Bobby Roode didn't, leaving that March. Eric Young followed him out the door soon after. That spring, the news became much grimmer than just talent fumbles. In April, it was revealed that Panda Energy, following years of losing millions, divested their interests in running TNA. A Tennessee-based company called Arrowlux stepped in to pay the bills in order to allow a recent TV taping to go on as scheduled, lest TNA breach their TV contract by not providing new content. Dixie was reportedly trying to sell up to 49% of company shares, allowing her to maintain 51% majority. Selling outright seemed to be the more likely result. On the creative side, one of TNA's veteran stars experienced an unexpected character resurgence in about the strangest way imaginable. During a feud with brother Jeff, Matt Hardy plunged into complete madness, altering his look and accent to become Broken Matt, a tortured, quasi-sophisticated madman that sought swift revenge on Jeff, or Brother Nero. That revenge would take place on his vast Hardy compound, in a match that entered the annals of pro wrestling history as the final deletion. The bizarre spectacle, complete with drones, dilapidated boats, pyrotechnic weaponry, and the immortal Señor Benjamin, captivated the minds of fans at a time when interest in TNA had never been lower. The July 5th Impact, in which Matt just about murdered Jeff out in the yard to claim sole ownership of the Hardy brand, drew 410,000 viewers, by and far the largest number Impact had garnered since moving to Pop 6 months earlier. That autumn, TNA made a newsworthy acquisition when they brought in Cody Rhodes, along with wife Brandi. Cody left WWE that May after requesting his release and was in the process of jump-starting his career away from WWE. In addition to wrestling for TNA, for whom he debuted at Bound for Glory, Rhodes also worked for Ring of Honor and later debuted for New Japan, joining Bullet Club. In all, Rhodes' time with TNA was brief, as his short-term contract expired in the spring of 2017. That Bound for Glory emanated from the Impact Zone in Orlando for the first time since the 2005 show. Lashley defeated EC3 in the world title match, while ever-reliable Gail Kim won the Knockouts title from Maria Kanellis. Eli Drake, Moose, Trevor Lee, the future Cameron Grimes, and Grado stabilized a promising midcard, while the rejuvenated and reunited Broken Hardys anchored the tag scene. The former Damien Sandow briefly turned up as Aaron Rex, going from old-school style babyface to a flamboyant character before leaving in April. But the bad news continued. Months after becoming TNA president, Billy Corgan, who was attempting to buy the company himself, filed suit over a reported unpaid debt. In addition, the state of Tennessee placed a lien on TNA for unpaid taxes. The continued troubles led to a monumental, albeit expected change: a sale. By January 2017, Anthem Sports and Entertainment purchased majority interest in TNA. Dixie retained just 5% interest and resigned as chairwoman after 14 years. The company was rebranded Impact Wrestling, with Jarrett brought back on board as consultant. In April, the remnants of Jarrett's Global Force promotion were consolidating into Impact. 2 months after that, Impact briefly rebranded as Global Force Wrestling. 2 unification matches were held at Slammiversary on July 2nd, as GFW title holders Alberto El Patron and Sienna, Allison Kay, defeated Lashley and Roseberry to win the Impact equivalents. The show also earned a bit of recognition for the performance of former NFL running back D'Angelo Williams, who shined in a tag match despite minimal experience. That autumn, Jarrett was out once more. After taking an indefinite leave of absence in September, Jarrett was officially terminated in October, in conjunction with him appearing to be inebriated at an independent card, though sources indicate that Jarrett was officially gone from TNA/Impact/GFW before the incident. The following year, Jarrett filed suit against his once again former employer over their use of GFW properties that he owned, like GFW matches on the Global Wrestling Network streaming service. The two sides eventually settled in 2021. By early 2018, former heel managers Scott D'Amore and Don Callis became executive vice presidents of what was once again Impact Wrestling, and the two assumed day-to-day operations of the company. Under their stewardship, Impact began to slowly expand its pay-per-view calendar, putting Redemption in the spring. The roster also began to fill out with genuine talents once more, like the returning Aries, Lucha Underground stars the Lucha Bros and Brian Cage, and indie mauler Sami Callihan. The Knockouts division picked up Su Yung and Kiera Hogan to supplement Taya Valkyrie and others, while Santana and Ortiz remained a dominant force in the tag title picture. Aries quickly became world champion once more after his return, defeating Eli Drake in January. He held the title for 3.5 months before losing it to Penta at Redemption, in a heralded three-way bout that included Rey Fenix. After getting the belt back days later, Aries retained his title over ex-NFL lineman Moose at Slammiversary before entering into a feud with Johnny Impact, the former John Morrison. Aries dropped the title to Impact at the annual Bound for Glory pay-per-view in New York City, but the title change was quickly overshadowed. After taking the fall, Aries sprung up, flipped off everyone in his vicinity, including Impact VP and announcer Callis, and stormed out. The pay-per-view was the last date on Aries' contract, and he was sent home upon arriving at the TV tapings for future events. Some sources reported that the post-match scene was Aries and Impact doing their own angle without authorization from management, but no matter. Aries left Impact following the match. This weirdness continued into early 2019, when Impact the TV series was moved from Pop to the Pursuit channel, which was owned by Impact parent company Anthem. Pursuit's viewership base was significantly smaller than that of Pop, and in fact, the premiere episode of Impact on the channel managed an abysmal 12,500 viewers. To compensate in shrink for the viewership base, Impact complemented the broadcasts with a simulcast on Twitch to reach those viewers that didn't have Pursuit. The move to Pursuit lasted only 9 months, though the latest channel change had a greater benefit. In September 2019, Anthem purchased majority interest in AXS TV, the American home of New Japan Pro Wrestling. The following month, Impact moved to AXS, taking a Tuesday night time slot following WWE SmackDown's move from Tuesdays to Fridays. Also that year, Impact Plus replaced the Global Wrestling Network as Impact's streaming service. At the turn of the 20s, Impact planned on making a bold move, putting its primarily men's world championship on a woman. Tessa Blanchard had been with Impact since the spring of 2018 and held the Knockouts title into early 2019, losing to Taya Valkyrie. In the summer of 2019, she feuded with Sami Callihan, resulting in the first ever intergender match to main event a pay-per-view. Callihan defeated her in the finale of a heavily praised Slammiversary. Months later, after Callihan won the world title from Brian Cage, Blanchard was set up to dethrone him. The match was due to take place at Hard to Kill in January 2020. However, just days before the title match, several wrestlers accused Blanchard of racism and backstage harassment, citing her alleged treatment of a wrestler named La Rosa Negra in 2017. Impact went ahead with the title change anyway, but the negative press blunted the intended historic nature of Blanchard's win. Shortly thereafter, when the coronavirus pandemic began, Blanchard took a leave of absence and refused to return when prompted by Impact. Between no champion and the pandemic wreaking havoc on everybody's plans, the news only got worse as the summer began. The speaking out movement had an effect on all levels of the wrestling industry, including promotions major and minor, and performers in Impact was certainly not immune. Dave Christ of OVE and Joey Ryan were fired shortly after accusations against each man surfaced, while Michael Elgin was initially suspended and later terminated for accusations levied at him. Meanwhile, Impact made the decision to formally terminate the contract of Blanchard. After her reported refusals to fly in for bookings, or to even record promos from home and send them in, it was clear that Champion Blanchard was not long for the organization. Reportedly, Blanchard gave Impact officials a substantial fee for a one-night return at Slammiversary to drop the belt, which they refused, and then subsequently fired her. The company already had to cancel their April pay-per-view Rebellion, relegating it instead to a 2-week TV broadcast after taping the matches ahead of time. Just as WWE had to hole up at the Performance Center and AEW at Daly's Place, Impact set up shop at a mostly sterile fan-free location, theirs being Skyway Studios in Nashville. During the early stages of the pandemic, Impact managed to still regularly produce television while setting the stage for the promotion's 18th anniversary card. The 2020 Slammiversary was set for July 18th, which just so happened to be a shade over 90 days after WWE's infamous roster bloodletting of that April. Much of the Slammiversary hype centered around which now former WWE talents might show up on the night. Indeed, the likes of Eric Young, the now mononymed Heath Slater, EC3, and the Good Brothers all made appearances 3 months after getting future endeavored. And the return of the Motor City Machine Guns helped supplement an Impact pay-per-view that made good on a significant amount of hype and intrigue. With the new and old wave flowing in, Impact continued onward with Bound for Glory, 15 years after the original. Eric Young had won the world title in the interim, but lost it here to former WWE Cruiserweight champion Rich Swann. On the same card, Swann's wife Sue Young won the Knockouts Championship from another talented WWE cast-off in Deonna Purrazzo, who would regain the title weeks later before holding it for close to the next year. As for Swann, his next significant challenge was going to come from outside Impact. That December, Kenny Omega won the AEW World title from Jon Moxley after a late-match heel turn facilitated by mentor Don Callis. Omega and Callis became an inseparable duo, and through a lot of agreement with Impact, began making appearances with both companies. Doc Gallows and Carl Anderson reunited with their Bullet Club comrade in his forthcoming appearances, while the Young Bucks subsequently followed suit. Outside of this super elite, Tony Khan and Tony Schiavone began buying promotional spots on Impact programming, which they'd use to merrily promote the forthcoming AEW Dynamite as pseudo-heels. The cross-promotional efforts led to a title-for-title match at Rebellion on April 25th, with Omega, who was also the AAA Mega Champion, putting his AEW title on the line against Swann's Impact World title, and by extension, the outmoded TNA World title that Swann had won from Moose. With Mauro Ranallo on the call as one-night guest announcer, Omega defeated Swann to become the holder of 4 different championship belts. Omega made several defenses of the Impact title over the months ahead. He retained the championship over Moose at June's Against All Odds with an assist from the Young Bucks. The following month at July's Slammiversary, he defeated Sami Callihan in a 28-minute Anything Goes match to retain the gold. All the while, Omega made defenses of the AEW World title, outlasting Pac and Orange Cassidy at May's Double or Nothing and retaining over Jungle Boy on a Dynamite broadcast at the end of June. The defense against Callihan was a special night for Impact, as they joined AEW and WWE in running in front of crowds once more. Just like with the previous year's Slammiversary, the timing of the event coincided with WWE's annual spring cleaning set of releases, though only 2 individuals showed up, both of them returns. Laurel Van Ness, the former and future Chelsea Green to team with significant other Matt Cardona, and Mickie James. Fellow releases The Iconics debuted for Impact that autumn as the inspiration. As for Omega, he dropped the Impact World title to a fellow AEW wrestler, though it was one with a history in Impact. Christian Cage debuted for AEW earlier that year, and he was the one to unseat Omega for the Impact belt on the AEW Rampage premiere that August. With his subsequent matches with Omega at All Out and title loss to Josh Alexander at Bound for Glory, Christian became the first man to wrestle main event pay-per-view matches for Impact, AEW, and WWE in one calendar year, having wrestled in the Men's Royal Rumble match that year as well. Meanwhile, Mickie James's return to Impact wasn't just the return of a familiar face in the near twilight of their career. She had designs on promoting women's wrestling, and did so with NWA Empower, a joint women's card held as part of NWA Anniversary Weekend. James had pushed for WWE to hold another Evolution pay-per-view, which Triple H would later call not a must-have during an NXT TakeOver conference call. Through Billy Corgan, and with support from both Impact and AEW, James produced Empower that August. She went on to win the Knockouts title from Purrazzo at the 2021 Bound for Glory, before retaining the title against her in a Texas death match at Hard to Kill in early 2022. On the eve of the pay-per-view, it was announced that James would make a guest appearance in the 2022 Women's Royal Rumble match, and was formally recognized as the Impact Women's Champion. Her inclusion came 9 months after her WWE release, which made headlines for James revealing that her belongings were sent to her in a garbage bag, for which talent relations executive Mark Carrano was fired. James had hoped that WWE and Impact would continue working together, though that wouldn't be so evident in the coming months. For WWE's part, they did allow AJ Styles to make a brief video cameo during the June 19th Slammiversary pay-per-view, taking place 20 years to the day after NWA TNA first beamed an uneven broadcast out of Huntsville, Alabama. Returning to their spiritual TNA Asylum home in Nashville for a night, Impact also broadcast well wishes from Sting and Angle. Jarrett was not part of the festivities in any way. Slammiversary was a night of strong showings, reunions, and celebrating TNA history. After Jordynne Grace won the Knockouts title in the first ever Queen of the Mountain match, Alexander retained his title to lower the boom on a well-received 20-year anniversary. After winning the title from Moose that April, Alexander cut a year-plus swathe through Impact, even defending the title in other promotions. Promotional vets like Alex Shelley and Eddie Edwards fell to the walking weapon, while an hour-long match with Mike Bailey that autumn earned critical acclaim. Unfortunately, Alexander was sidelined with torn triceps in the spring of 2023, resulting in the belt being held up. Steve Macklin captured the title at April's Rebellion before dropping it to Shelley in June. In April, Impact made a notable signing when they acquired Trinity, the former Naomi, approximately 1 year after she and Mercedes Moné walked out of WWE following a dispute. After being fed a steady diet of opponents like Giselle Shaw and Kylie King over her first few outings, Trinity won the Knockouts Championship from Purrazzo at Slammiversary in July, becoming the first wrestler to submit the Virtuosa. Likely on the strength of interest in Trinity, Slammiversary did 4,400 buys, more than 250% higher than the previous year. The headline generation continued. At the conclusion of October's Bound for Glory, held before 1,000 fans at Chicago's Cicero Stadium, a sizable love letter was sent to Impact's longtime diehards. On a night where Will Ospreay defeated Mike Bailey in a certified classic, Jordynne Grace won a Call Your Shot gauntlet, and Alex Shelley retained the world title over Josh Alexander, Scott D'Amore announced that Impact would revert to the TNA branding in early 2024. Subtitled TNA Wrestling is Back, Hard to Kill drew over 1,600 fans to Las Vegas to kick off a year of rejuvenation and renewal. Jordynne Grace and Moose won the Knockouts and Men's World titles respectively across the double main event, while AJ Francis, the former Top Dollar, Ash by Elegance, the former Dana Brooke, and Nick Nemeth, the former Dolph Ziggler, all made their promotional debuts. The 2024 TNA revival was off to a strong, critically heralded start. Weeks later, another agreement was reached for a TNA competitor to participate in the annual WWE Royal Rumble. Reigning Knockouts champion Jordynne Grace took part in the 30-woman gauntlet, entering the fray from the number 5 position. Though she lasted 19 minutes, Grace didn't register a single elimination. Meanwhile, Trinity, having just returned to WWE as Naomi, lasted 62 minutes from the number 2 spot and scored 2 eliminations in a promotional return. Unfortunately, TNA was beset with startling news on February 7th. Scott D'Amore was suddenly out, terminated from his position as president. Reports were abound that D'Amore and the management at Anthem had conflicting visions over the future of TNA, leading to D'Amore suddenly being thrust out. Longtime Anthem executive and Fight Network president Anthony Ciccione takes over for D'Amore, while a number of TNA performers only express sadness over D'Amore's sudden ousting. April's Rebellion pay-per-view in Vegas felt like business as usual in the post-D'Amore world, as new TNA sensations Alex Hammerstone and Mustafa Ali occupied space with a host of regulars, including Frankie Kazarian and Eric Young, who squared off in a match straight out of 2004-era TNA. In addition, Matt Hardy made his return to TNA, issuing a challenge to champion Moose. In the same period, cult favorite Joe Hendry busted a few music charts with his I Believe in Joe Hendry theme song, peaking in the top 10 of the UK singles chart. By early June, 4 months after Grace's Rumble appearance, a fuller working relationship manifested between TNA and WWE. Names like Grace, Hendry, Hammerstone, and more turned up in NXT, as did the Rascals, reuniting with their former partner Wes Lee, a reunion that would soon turn sour, leading former friends to become foes. During the early stages of the agreement, Jeff Hardy resurfaced in TNA, shortly after departing AEW following a disjointed 2-year run. The connection between TNA and the NXT brand led to increased television viewership for both programs, not to mention surges in attendance for both groups' events. That accounts for the 4,100 fans for TNA Slammiversary in Montreal on July 20th. On a night with 4 title changes, Nemeth capped off TNA's 22 years of existence by winning Moose's TNA World title in a half-hour-long 6-way bout. In October at Bound for Glory, Nemeth retained his world title against Hendry, a decision that left many fans questioning TNA's commitment to nurturing new talent. Even 22 years on, TNA remains reliant on established stars rather than fully investing in their rising prospects. Only time will tell if Hendry will eventually become the face of the company, or if history will repeat itself, pushing yet another promising competitor to seek success elsewhere. During those 22 years of life, TNA has morphed and contorted, innovated and imitated, courted death, and forged life like no other promotion. It was an alternative at a time when the business needed one, and a punching bag whenever fans desired one. TNA provided a platform for future stars to elevate their skills. It also offered legends a place to revive their careers, sometimes even surpassing their past achievements. For fans, TNA brought new hope, showing that wrestling could always try to grow and evolve rather than merely sticking to the status quo. Against all odds, TNA has continued to chip away at the stronghold of a dominant industry giant. Whether it will ever cross the line remains an ambitious goal yet to be achieved. However, no one can deny that total Nonstop Action has left a lasting impact on the wrestling world.